What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm so honored to have back on the show once again cult and cult abuse survivor, overcomer, and whistleblower, vice president of the nonprofit Tucson Pops Orchestra, freelance social media photographer, future cosmetology school graduate, Penn State University alum, former digital content creator for KGUN9, artist, creative, and an incredible hero who has stepped up to break the silence on cult abuse and to educate on how victims can take steps to get out, Caleb Fernandez. A little bit about Caleb if you guys are new here, if you missed his first testimony episode, or if you just need a little refresher. Born into a Southern California cult that wove its tendrils through generations, Caleb entered this world already entangled in a web of ritual abuse, mind manipulation and control, and the haunting machinery of coercion. Church leaders were not distant figures, but active participants in his suffering and trauma. He endured the silent screams of childhood trauma, brushes with human trafficking disguised as mission trips, and the insidious grip of unclean spirits that he boldly names within the walls of Calvary Chapel, an organization he unflinchingly calls a cult whose chains must be shattered and exposed so others can breathe free. Yet, even as a little boy, a light inside of him refused to be extinguished. While others bowed under the weight of fear and dogma, Caleb discovered a secret language louder than any threat: the power of creation. From his earliest school days, he poured his entire being into musical theater, where performance, music, and collective artistry became his sanctuary. On stage, under lights that felt like an escape from reality, he found a voice that could not be silenced. That creative current, raw, resilient, and radiant, carried him forward like a river carving through stone. It led him to Penn State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in advertising and public relations, armed with the tools of storytelling and influence. From there, he soared to New York City, mastering production, photography, and art direction, skills that would later become both his personal expression and his weapons of advocacy. Today, at 33 years old, Caleb stands as living proof that survival is not mere endurance. It's an alchemical transformation. His escape, hard won and culminating in 2025, was no quiet exit, but a triumphant breaking of chains. Every step forward has been an act of radical courage. Now free, he channels that hard won wisdom into lifting others up as a dedicated survivor advocate and whistleblower. As vice president of the nonprofit Tucson Pops Orchestra, he turns music into medicine and community into sanctuary, proof that the same hands, once bound by control, can now conduct symphonies of healing. He continues as a freelance social media photographer and strategic digital creative, drawing on expertise in still and moving images, retouching, scripting, editing, event planning, and brand representation. With cosmetology school on the horizon, his creative vision expands ever outward, crafting beauty from the very places where darkness once tried to claim him. But Caleb is so much more than a survivor. He's a living harmony of resilience, a man who gathered the shattered notes of his past and composed a future filled with purpose, artistry, and fierce advocacy. His testimony is not only deeply moving, it is irrefutable evidence and an urgent beacon. Calvary Chapel operates as a cult, and there are practical, life-saving tips anyone still trapped inside can take to break free. He gives a voice to the silenced and a torch to the weary. His story reminds every person who has ever felt trapped, silenced, or broken that the light inside you is stronger than any cult, any abuse, and any chain. From the depths of unimaginable darkness, Caleb has risen, not merely to survive, but to sing, to create, to lead, and to show others the way out. His voice carries the unmistakable frequency of freedom, and that sound is changing lives. In him, we see not just the power of one's soul to reclaim itself, but the promise that every shattered life can become a masterpiece of hope. So rise with him, hear his song, and know that freedom is possible. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, survivor and warrior, walking miracle, voice for the voiceless, cult abuse educator and survivor advocate, passionate purveyor of truth, content visionary and creator, my new friend and chain breaker, the one, the only, Caleb Fernandez. Caleb, it is so good to have you back. Thank you for being here with us again today.
Thank you, Emma, and to all your subscribers, and just thank you so much for the comments from the last video. It was humbling. I was there just kind of going through. Of course, there's a couple haters, but everybody else, the other 99%, I was just like, thank you. Like this shows that we're speaking to the right people, and even it looked like other people were kind of learning about Calvary Chapel too. So those ones who had never heard of it and didn't know the horrors, it's comforting.
And I thank everybody too. It's always scary for sort of a new organization, religious body, business. It's hard exposing new things, especially when there's so many people still going there. Last time we talked about back in the 90s how many members were going to these churches, and now they've spread so much further today into 2026. And for some of the people that do reach out and they appear to be haters, some of them actually are because they're being hired to help cover up what's happening. But there's also this like identity crisis that comes with people that have had a history like you, where they might be born into these cults, or they've been in it for a long time, or they've invested a lot of time and energy. Their families go there. It's like their community, and I see that a lot too with the survivors coming forward about the LDS, Mormon church as well. And it happens with everything, but there's also people who like really experience that identity crisis too, and I think it's really brave of you to come forward knowing that you could have this opposition. And I also think it's important that even the people who can't yet face it hear it, because you're planting seeds that might later on bloom into an awakening where they're like, oh shit, he was right, So I'm really proud of you for stepping forward, and I'm so grateful that the response has been so positive. And even on my side, I've gotten a couple emails from others in the church as well who talk to me privately about having experiences similar to yours. So all around, it's been extremely validating.
Yeah, I've been watching Escaping Polygamy. It's one of the few, juicy, good shows I haven't seen yet, and I've just been using Tubi, and I was looking at that show, and one of the girls said, because she was from like the Kingston family, which is like has so much notoriety in Utah, and she was just like, it's you don't realize, like, once you get out, you're like, wait, how do I think? Like, because your entire thought process up until that point has been hijacked. And when she said that, uh, I completely identified with it, and I was like, you know what? That's why I've been feeling this like surreal effect these last couple years, because as I've been exiting, I'm like, wait, like, we all have lessons from our childhood, right? Like whether it's our mother, father, whoever, and especially if you're in something like Calvary Chapel from birth, it's like you constantly have the pastor at my church at the back of your head, because in Calvary Chapel structure, like, they want to pretend like they're so much better than the Catholic Church, but really they lift their pastors up on pedestals. And that's why if you look up online, they're like they're categorized as like evangelical, like almost epicostal, but they're run like a cult. And I've seen that again and again and again, and I'm like, this makes so much sense why I felt like this constant uncomfortableness there, and the manipulation of even my parents because they got suckered in. So there's so much that that we could go on and on about, but it's helping those people who are stuck in there, like with the LDS, or it's there what I'm realizing, especially from watching these things and hearing other people's comments, is that it's they know something's off. Maybe you can't say wrong, but a lot of them and even me at the time, like I knew something was off. I was like, why am I getting weird looks when I mention Calvary Chapel? Why am I getting weird looks if I question within the church of Calvary Chapel? Like why again, after 30 years, I'm like, oh wow, all of it makes so much sense now, and especially learning about my neurodivergence and being able to say like, okay, I was recognizing patterns that entire time, and I was just so dedicated to Calvary Chapel that I would ignore red flags. And that's not just me, right? Like that's everybody. Some people do that in relationships, some people do that at work. But it's when it's like supposed to be your escape that brings you closer to God, it was just it's hell.
Absolutely. And when it's something that you've experienced since childhood too, you have no other canvas in a sense to compare it to. Like if you're experiencing, and I know we didn't get to talk about this last time, but you actually experienced sexual abuse within the church, which is also common for a lot of survivors that come out to say that they also
Yeah.
experienced. But when you're a little child and this is happening to you from people that you trust, people that are in your community, that's also very normalized to where the child, it's wrong, but the child internalizes it as this is what love is, this is what you do with adults, this is normal, especially when there's
Hmm.
no adult stepping in to help correct and course correct or have some type of a repercussion or accountability. And a lot of times this stuff's secret anyways, but when there's not that course correct of no, wait, this is wrong, like this should never, your autonomy should never be jeopardized by another adult, you should never be touched there, this should never happen, this isn't appropriate. If you're not told that, like that's your example of what children do with adults, and that's just becomes like how you have relationships. And so there's so
Hmm.
many ways too that like that identity crisis is challenged so much, like you said, when you finally get a chance to breathe and like look outside of the bubble that you've been in and to be like, wait, that's not how things are supposed to be. This isn't right. Or I should have autonomy and be able to make my own decisions. How do I do that? It gets like difficult when you've had sort of been puppeteered your whole life and had a direction organized by people outside of yourself, like how we talked about last time. That was a big part of your life. You were like being steered in a direction that they wanted you to go, even though it might not have been in your heart what you would have chosen to do had you not had
Hmm.
all that grooming your whole life to kind of push you there.
Again, it's you don't know how different things are until you start asking yourself the right questions, and to be able to even first of all, that takes like a willingness, and I don't think that's anything, any Ivy League school could teach someone. And it's just like no matter where you come from, and that's what I think, it's a gift from God. It's like God has to give you that willingness to question. And when you question things like I did, and when tried questioning and getting solace from people within Calvary Chapel, you just either don't hear back or they switch the subject. And both tell you that don't worry about it. Both tell you this doesn't matter right now. Like don't talk about these things. And having what I experienced when I ended up going to therapy eventually, 30 years later, I'm like, okay, what I experienced was considered psychosexual abuse. And so a lot of people know what like emotional abuse is. A lot of people know what sexual abuse is, but psychosexual is when there's a psychological component, kind of like it implies. So we obviously know what the sexual aspect is. It's completely inappropriate, but the psychological, what makes it psychosexual is you're basically you don't like any type of abuse is wrong, right? But with kids that are typically getting abused like that, the the parent or the person doing it might tell them, this is just what adults do, or this is, this, we're gonna play a game. And like that was never done to me. What was done to me was, oh, we're gonna clean you, we're gonna take care of you. So I was thinking, okay, like I guess this is just what has to be done in order to make me clean. And you then go through that the rest of your life. Like would remember that in my teens, and I would just be like, no, that didn't happen. And I would literally just tell myself, no, that didn't happen. But then I remember being in college now, and like Kathy O'Brien has talked plenty about a lot of the MK Ultra icons, if you can call them that, but the OGs, like a lot of them have spoken about how cannabis, like the reason why cannabis has gotten a bad rep is because it kind of unlocks things. And that's what was happening to me in college. Like I, the, I found solace in that, not just probably because of my neurodivergence, but I was, I was literally starting to remember things, and I almost went crazy, and thank God I didn't, because I was starting to just doubt everything that I had been up until that point. Like I went to Penn State and I took Jewish study courses because I wanted to understand that Jesus was this man, yes, but also what was the academic leading up to that. Let me look at the Bible from an academic perspective. And I got all that. And so I knew, like, okay, at the back of my mind, I'm starting to have these thoughts. They're coming in. I need to keep focused. And let me smoke some more weed. And I'm just gonna be frank, because I was like, I know that there are thoughts there that I've been shutting down. Basically, that's what it was. Like I was starting to have the realization and the self-awareness. That's what it is. I was starting to have the full self-awareness that there are thoughts I've been repressing. Which what we've come to learn, it's compartmentalization. You're fracturing your brain. You're creating the mirror effect, right? You're doing that, and then all the parts of your brain are, the Calvary Chapel Caleb, the growing up in a small town kind of Caleb, now this Penn State leadership Caleb, all of them are trying to work together, but at the same time I'm like, wait, like these are things that I have ignored for all of my life. How am I going to fit this in? And it took, confronting the people, telling my parents. It took a lot of that, but even then that wasn't the end of my Calvary Chapel journey. I was still, I was finding things like this around the house, which is a great example. I mean, like at the time, this was probably, I don't know, 20, maybe $30. I don't know. There's no price tag on it, but I looked on Amazon. It's like, it says it was for 20 and it's on sale for like $12. I don't know, 13. But Chuck Smith, he's like, I'll read the back on what it says. Chuck Smith is the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa, one of the largest and most dynamic churches in the United States. His Bible studies are heard on the Word for Today radio program, which is broadcast daily on hundreds of stations throughout the U.S. and on the internet around the world. He is the author of many books on the deeper walk and is known for his simple teaching style, which makes the Word of God understandable to all. And so this would be great if this was like handed out, to Calvary Chapel new members and anybody just joining the church, just want some extra biblical, type of, walking through. Like, I don't think that's wrong at all. But to have like a whole series and then be selling these and shelling them, hawking them at the church. Like we had a little like church room, and it had a little like a little library setup, and all these were there, but you had to buy them. Like it looked nice until you walk up and you're like, oh, this is $20. You probably want to put it back. But there were all kinds of these, and on the last podcast I brought up how like I didn't physically have it. I can't find it, but somewhere in my house there's a CD set that was like $60-$70. And I just think like the amount of money that my parents wasted buying these, this is what they do in MLMs.
Well, yeah, and like you said, there's nothing wrong with providing resources, but that's when it starts to turn into that cult abuse, when you can't progress in your quote unquote growth in the church unless you're
Hmm.
spending all this money. And like you said, the Bible you should be able to get for free in a church. Like that should just be there for as a resource for people, and they're available everywhere. And that's what these organizations say that they're promoting is what's in the Bible, yet they have their own interpretations, their own books, their own collections, their own CDs, and then they're not giving them to you for free. They're making you invest in them. And like you said last time, it was sort of like a status thing. Like you'd go to people's homes in the church and it would be almost like comparing, like, oh, look, they have all these books, like they're higher up on the scale than we are,
Hmm.
climbing up. And so it turns it into like, it keeps the hierarchy in place and it helps promote that cult environment. But for people in it, it seems more like personal development. Like to them, they don't see what's wrong with that, and how we were talking about last time, how then all of a sudden you see these church leaders wearing these designer clothes and like, these people that should be like serving the community are now pocketing this money, and it's going to their salaries, it's going to their homes, their finances, and you guys are sitting there pouring money out of your pockets to pay for these things, so that's where it gets like abusive. It's just like abuse of power.
It is. It's manipulation. It's abuse of power. It's leading people astray. And I thank God, because I think of the scripture that's like basically whatever Satan or the devil does wrong, God will use for the glory of him. So it's kind of like whatever evil is being done, God's still going to allow a good way to work out of that. And I trust that. I believe our creator wouldn't allow all of this just to mess with us and be like, here you guys go. I don't believe that. Calvary Chapel hasn't ruined religion for me. I still trust that there's a creator. It's like, we are creation. That's why we're creative. And I think that's why so many people are stifled nowadays, because more people consume than they create. And I think, even though that might seem unrelated, it's like, no, that's kind of what Calvary Chapel would do. Is you would have an idea, and then it's like, well, how does Jesus fit around this? And that's great to have an awareness, to always be thinking like, what would Jesus do? I don't think that's bad, but to constantly like replace your cognitive thinking with Jesus, I think that's not healthy. And it wouldn't even be like, what would Jesus, or not even like wrapping Jesus around it. It's like, now let's wrap Pastor Pete around it because that was us, or let's wrap Pastor Chuck Smith around it because he was like the Pope forever of Calvary Chapel. And and that was something that I felt so not comfortable professing my disagreement with, because I thought, well, Caleb, is this you like denying them the maybe not the opportunity to talk about Christ, but like, is this you kind of criticizing them for being a Jesus freak, maybe? And what I eventually came to was, no, it's like, it's okay to love, to have Jesus in your heart and to chase a relationship with God, our creator. But when you're like, it's like saying like, what's 2 plus 2? And then instead of it saying 4, your answer is, well, would Jesus do the math? It's like, I don't, and I don't know how you can win with that, because I kind of, I tried doing everything I could, and it's frustrating. But at this point, all I can do is just laugh.
100%. And another thing I want to unpack, if it's okay with you, about your story, just because I think this is a way that abuse hides in all different religious institutions, and where abusers more so get away with this as children. You mentioned such a good point, that it's not the abuse that you incurred. It's not sort of the typical way that pedophiles might work, where it's a slow grooming through play and tickling and touch, to where they're like interacting physically with you and like getting close with you relationally. This is more like they're enacting ceremonial abuse, to where they're making sexual abuse a part of normal church ceremony that should be holy and without abuse. And if you don't want to share parts from your specific story, like your own experiences, you don't have to. But sort of what I was looking for is maybe examples of that, because I'd like parents listening to understand how it could happen to them with their children, with these typical things that seem very routine in churches, these different ceremonies and ways that they're, helping initiate different levels of being in a church, but how it can be abusive. Would you be able to give some examples in how this was happening in Calvary?
Yeah, so I'm gonna mention Oprah, not because I think we should all be subscribing to the Oprah Winfrey Network and watching her stuff, or even looking to her for salvation, but she said in an interview one time that if the person molesting you is any good at it, and that doesn't mean like pleasure wise, it's just like carrying out the abuse. If they are good at that, you won't even notice that it's abuse. And so I know that that statement is controversial and it has irked a lot of people. It even gives me the ick, just kind of thinking about that, having to carefully dance around the words. But she really was right, because I think that that's what screwed me up so much, was thinking like, okay, I know something's this obviously is creating PTSD in my body. I'm not I'm like, I can remember looking over at myself. I even remember everything happening. And you only really get that like effect when it's severe trauma going on, when you're able to like see yourself, right? Like that's what a lot of SRA survivors talk about, is like when they were going through that stuff, they kind of like went out of their body and looked at themselves. And that in itself, not only have did I repress that for many years, like I said, but the it was finally accepting, like in college, like, Caleb, this was not okay. And I even had to, I mean, I ended up telling some people who I was close to in college, and there are a couple things on that. Like when you tell people about your abuse, even if they're not in a cult or whatever, included in that control system with you, you'll find which people actually value your friendship, because the ones who wanted only fun with me, they were like, they heard me out, but they didn't ask any questions. They didn't want to like keep checking up on me, versus one that did go through abuse herself as a child. One of my model friends that I got really close to in New York, like she let me know, she was like, actually, I did experience something similar. I think not exactly, and she wasn't taking the attention away from me. We were just like, she ended up sharing that, and I've had moments like that where when I did share, like even a different friend years ago was like, you know what? One time this man like walked by and just like flipped my boob, and my mom was like right here, but she didn't say anything. And the man just kept walking, and I was like, what do I do? She was just so shocked. She was like a just like, wait, that happened so quickly. What do I do? Do I do I scream for help? Do I tell my mom? Do I run to the manager? I think it was like at a store, and she just like, all those thoughts ran through her head, and she never said anything. She never said anything to anyone until I shared about my experience. And looking back on all those different types of examples, I'm like, you know what? Like, that's why we need to talk about these things, because when people see that, they then start to question, it plants that seed. And even if it's just a little seed, even if they say, like, I don't know, this guy seems a little weird, he bleaches his eyebrows and his facial hair, it's all, this guy might be a little too kooky for me. But God willing, what they're going to hear is just that one little piece that helps plant that seed and water it, in the same way that like we used to say, like, watering our seed for God's salvation. I see this as like God's work doing this and talking about these things, because nobody wants to talk about stuff that might make them look crazy or might make them look um, unwelcome in their community. We're social creatures, and we want to have bonds. We want to be able to confide and look to people and not be judged. But when you're constantly like, that's what Calvary Chapel is. Like, I think a lot of churches do this, but specifically like Calvary Chapel, I even wrote down like, um you have that pressure to go. Like, I remember if we missed a Sunday church, people would be like, where were you? Like, oh, where were you last Sunday? Like, or they do in the Christianese, like, oh, we missed you so much last Sunday, where were you? And it's not, I mean, some of them might be caring, but as the years went on, I realized, I'm like, my parents are going, and my parents can't be the only one. There must be other people who are going just because they don't want to have those questions asked. They don't want to seem like they're an inconsistent Christian. And how we've been told, there's good peer pressure, there's bad peer pressure. In that case, I think it's toxic peer pressure, because it's making you feel welcome. It's making you feel like the good Christian. And that's kind of why Calvary Chapel is like a McDonald's, right? They get you in, they feed you a couple verses, and then you get out with your worship feeling good. But it's not a healthy environment, and that's probably why sexual abuse and different types of abuse. And I know Calvary Chapel tries to say they're, even though they're non-denominational, they're progressive. They like to preach that they are progressive, but they still don't let women be leaders. A woman can be a deacon in the church, but she can't be a leader. They let them get involved up until a point. It I don't know if it's, if you want to call it outdated, if you want to call it sexist or just ignorant, whatever it is, it's something that they're not allowing people. And that doesn't I'm not a woman that was limited in the church. If anything, they were giving me more and more responsibilities up until they saw, like, wait, Caleb's asking questions he shouldn't be. Caleb's doing things and he's calling us on the hypocrisy. And they started to pull back some of my responsibilities, probably thinking like, oh, this is going to make him chase, right? It's kind of like a narcissistic love bombing supply. It's like, let's give him some of this and then kind of pull back. And they would do that to other leaders. They would burn leaders out. Like, a man that I knew there in the church who helped me when I came back from New York, he was principal for a while. He was in the worship, and he had back problems. And poor guy, he like kept going and going and going and going. And like, that might not be direct abuse, but I feel like that's indirect abuse, because they were probably telling him, "Oh, you're suffering for God, right? Like, suffer for God. It's okay. You can be a martyr." But at that point, it's just further manipulation. It's getting people to believe that they're, I don't know if you would call it, what is it, like Stockholm syndrome, or they're clinging to the manipulation because they think that that's what's keeping them and bringing them closer to God.
And that's such a good point to make about Stockholm syndrome, because that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And people that are in that, it's like you said about what Oprah said, if abuse is done right by the abuser, meaning that they get away with it and that it's not exposed, they're able to perpetrate, and they're doing it and there's no repercussions. The person being abused has no idea that they're being abused, and that person a lot of times even loves their abuser. So many
Hmm.
times when survivors come forward, one of the things that they hear is, "What do you mean you were abused by that person? I always saw you happy around them, or I saw photos of you and you were smiling with that person, your father, your church leader, whoever it is." And it's like, that's how abuse works. You don't realize it until you step away, like you said, and look at it with a critical eye, with a different perspective, and start asking questions. But when you're groomed, when this is something that's normalized, when it's something that is embedded into the very culture that you're in, and the community seems to go along with it that you're a part of, including family and leaders, you end up having this sort of idolization for the very people that are abusing you, whether it's a physical, sexual type of abuse, or whether it's manipulation and coercive control. It's something that you're not even aware is happening. These are people that you would defend if anybody were to come forward and say anything about. And that sometimes too is like what happens in the comments when we see people have this opposition. That person could never do that. I love that person. That's a beloved member of our community. How could you ever say that? I knew that person growing up. They're my friend. They would never do something like that. That's where you see these like tendrils of Stockholm syndrome, this like idolization of
Mm.
abusers, because they are so good at what they do that people can't even see abuse when it's right in front of them.
Yeah, there's a reason why the abuse is literally like breaking someone's brain. It's fracturing you, because you're everybody has heard at some point, like, the body keeps the score, and it's so true. It's like your body is like, your mind might be able to repress it forever and ever, or up until, or what you think is forever, but up until that point when you as an individual have to decide, am I going to ask myself these uncomfortable questions that might change my whole perspective on reality? And a lot of people don't want to have that perspective shift. What they know is okay. And even like with my sister, she self-harmed herself in high school, and she's like a year and a half older than me. And I remember she carved a cross into her arm, and I remember I saw that and I was just like, wait, what? And my parents saw that and of course freaked out. They like, I remember they like locked themselves in the room with her and like for like an hour, and I was just like, what's going on? Like, why can't I go in? And then they sent her, it's actually right here, like in as a bookmark. They sent her to a marriage and family therapist. And this was like, again, this is like 2020, or let me think, like 2008, maybe around that time, like 2008, 2007, from around that time. And she was a Christian marriage and family therapist. And when my parents sent her sent my sister there, the therapist at one point ended up wanting to talk to me. And I don't know what my sister told her or what happened, but when the therapist was like, "Can I actually like can you bring your son in, your younger son? I think that it would be good if I talk to him as well." And my parents were like, "Nope, nope." They like completely stopped. They stopped sending my sister there, and the whole reason they had even sent her there was because they didn't want her to be on drugs. They didn't want to send her to like a typical psychiatrist. They were like, let's, this is a good Christian marriage and family therapist. She'll, you know, she's within our approval rating. But her questioning and now wanting to talk to me, I think she for sure must have seen something in my sister and thought, if there's a younger sibling, he's probably being affected too. I want to I want to do my job and actually like see what's going on in this family, because so many, I mean, so many people have a facade, right? They think their persona is their actual selves. They don't realize the character that they've kind of been programmed to carry out, like an archetype. And I saw that to like the max at Calvary. It was, and even just with my parents, like I help put up that image. Like you might be arguing in the car, but as soon as the car door opens in Calvary Chapel, time to walk into service, you put on your smile and everybody's just happy, and you're like, "Hey, Pastor, how you doing?" And I used to think that that was normal because that was being done all throughout my childhood, all into my teens, and then I would maybe at like I remember revealing that to a different person there at Calvary Chapel, and they were like, "Well, my family does that too," and I was like, "Well, okay, like, thank you for sharing, but how is that even healthy? Like, if my family's doing that and your family's doing that, that means there are probably a ton of other families at Calvary Chapel that are like arguing their asses off in the van. And then as soon as that van door opens up, that mom car opens up, they just start, they're smiling and looking at, doing whatever they have to do. And I again, it's just I always had something irking me when I would experience those moments, because I'm like, this isn't Christian. I know nobody's perfect. I know we all have our faults, and this just doesn't feel okay. This doesn't feel. I mean, it's not even that it felt fake. It just felt misleading. It's like, shouldn't we be able to show that we're not having a good day? Like, isn't that what would bring even more empathy within the church? Like if you kind of come in not in the best mood, wouldn't that show people like, hey, this person might be having a moment, maybe they need more prayer, more guidance at that moment, like rather than put on this, hi, good morning everyone. And that, along with my musical theater upbringing, I think that that's why I learned to just like have a mask for so many years, because not only was I able to express it in musical theater and like enjoy the judgment, because musical theater is fun, but you are being judged. It's like, you're subjecting yourself to judgment on how you sound, on how you look, on how you're dancing, on how well you're performing, all of it. And in a way, it was fun for me because I was like, no, I need judgment that's under my control, if that makes sense. Like judgment that I can subject myself to. And I think that that's why I liked modeling. I think that's why I got into even the news, because I was like, I hadn't fully realized myself, and I I needed to have a control on me, but because I'm a bit of a control freak too, like I wanted to be in control of what's controlling me, which is probably so ridiculous, but that's kind of what my mind kind of worked out. And it's that control that I think we all want to have, like we all want to have validation, right? We all want, we're again, things, but when you keep subjecting yourself to the control, and you're having to, I mean, your brain is super powerful, and you can tell yourself everything that you've seen, which is questionable and maybe naughty or inappropriate. If you tell yourself it's all okay and that's all normal, you will begin to think that it's okay and it's normal. And I think that it's like I'm having trouble conveying that, but it's like that's the key to understanding if you're in a cult or not. Because you can read all those cult lists, you can see like, okay, there's like a charismatic leader, there's an in and out bias, there's, it goes down the list. And yes, you can do that, but when you're in the midst of a cult, like you can't always recognize that the leader's so charismatic. You can't always recognize that there's an in and out group because you think, well, yeah, we're Christians and they're not. But then if you closely dissect it, it's like, no, no, no. In Calvary Chapel, it's like, we're non denominational. We are not like, not just Catholics, we're not like other Protestants. We have it's almost like the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's like we have the message from God told to Chuck Smith, just like they have what is it? It's it what is it? I forget his name. I mean, they have the Jeff Warrens. That was a different one that they call the prophet in Utah. The one that I don't know if you know who he is, that got arrested, and yeah, he's in like prison right now, still running the church. Like they have those ones, but to like that's why I kept I got so into the escaping polygamy because I'm like, obviously I didn't grow up in a polygamous environment, but I thought, wait, a lot of this is so similar. Like, no wonder I get stuck on these different cult series when I do watch them, or I really like Leah Remini. Like years ago when I was starting to question this stuff, I was like, wow, she's really in a cult. But as I kept watching her and listening to her interviews, I was like, wait, that doesn't sound that different than what I'm doing. Like last podcast we talked about the prayer chains being used as like gossip channels and control systems. And Scientology literally had that. They had their auditing reports where they would bring them in, and if they found out somebody wrote something on you that you didn't confess to, then ooh, you're in big trouble now, and they're rewarded. So right, it like rewards people for gossiping, being tattletales. It rewards people for that environment. And that was the same thing with Calvary, is like, oh, you're not on the prayer chain. It's like, yeah, they then see that as a problem. And it can go on and on and on. It really is a spider web, because you pluck one little end of it, and the rest vibrates. And that's what makes it so hard to even step out of, because not only do you have your family, right? A lot of people think like, okay, when you're leaving a cult, you leave your family or the people who you thought loved you or were your friends. But it really comes down to the perspective and what you're having to question now. Because I want to be able to find extra, biblical books. I want to be able to listen to YouTube channels that have this. But each time I do, I now have this wall up because of everything that I've experienced. And some people don't want to let that wall down. I work so hard to remove a couple bricks from the top, just so some people can come in and I can kind of look out too. But it's hard because you're I mentioned earlier, you're thinking for yourself now without the cult mindset, but you're also having to decide, am I choosing am I going to choose to be vulnerable? And hardly anybody wants to be vulnerable now, especially with social media, right? It like put up your favorite moment, your best moment on Instagram and all that. And what took me a while to even be able to talk about this was that vulnerability. And I yes, it's uncomfortable, but I can't succumb to it, because that vulnerability is what is making all of this possible.
And I could listen to you talk about this all day. I love how you articulate these really hard things, because it's such a dichotomy that cults are literally all around us. They're literally, we drive by them, Freemason lodges. We were talking about brands last time. We go
Mm,
shopping, and we're
mm,
shopping in places that have a cult environment that even the employees don't know exists. Churches, they hide in public, and we think that like cults exist on these like little remote areas where there's sort of like these hillbillies that are like, it's like a reservation almost of people who are completely
mm.
separated from society. And even though those types of cults exist also, it's really challenging for people to face that these things are right in their close proximity. This isn't on a reservation somewhere in, you know, uh, out in the middle of nowhere where it's completely separated
Yeah.
from them. It's in our environment. And that's really difficult, I think, for people to wrap their minds around. And especially when somebody like you comes forward and is like, no, this isn't just in your environment. Like, it's in your church, this is in your organization. And it's really hard for people, especially when it's masked so well. Like I said, there's people that jump on comments, whether it's a video like yours, whether it's a video on LDS abuse, whether it's a video on, a Christian church that somebody went through, and people are like, no, that's not true. I've been going there my whole life. I've known that pastor for this many years. Like, they would never do that, you know? And that's where you see that cold environment to where it's masked so well that people don't even realize like what they're seeing. It's invisible to them, and it's not anything that they were taught a cult might be or where it might exist. And right down to the
Mhm.
types of abuse that you were talking about. And I'd love a couple more examples of that if you have them. I think that that's another way that this is all masked so well, because it's literally like built into the foundations of like the different milestones at church. You know, I'm thinking as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about, I grew up Catholic, and we had different milestones. There's
Mhm.
like your confession, your communion, there's your reconciliation, there's like
Mhm.
different milestones, there's your baptism. And these are all at the hands of church leaders that you participate in these with. And I'm just thinking like, gosh, that would have been so easy. Like, I wonder if I probably went to church with kids who had these ceremonies privately with a church leader, and they're being abused. You know, God forbid, I hope not, but I just see how easily that could fit in an environment. Would you be able to share a couple other ways that this happened to children in the church? Like, what types of ceremonies, or um, I guess even like rituals, you know, there's like different ways. There's
Mhm.
like ritualistic practices that happen in churches. Like, what ways, what are they doing to kids in these churches? Like, when is this happening? Because I'm sure it's still happening today if it happened to you.
Oh yeah, and it all starts young. I mean, I think that's the key to indoctrination, right? Is the starting young, and what we learned from SRA survivors is that it's crucial to make it happen before 5. Like if you make it all happen before 5, it's gonna be embedded in them, like epigenetically, it's locked in. And whether you want to look at it as maybe something as simple as like a song that I know to this day is, you know, Jesus, or how does it go, like Jesus loves all the little children, all the little children of the world, like that, like having us sing songs like that, the VBS, I think I yeah, so one of those pictures last time we showed, I was like dressed up as a robot for since I was doing the children's ministry, and there are a bunch of little kids like holding their certificate. And so there are a couple of tangents that I want to go into, like when like a complaint that I've heard about modern society is how we give certificates to everyone for everything. Like, oh, you got 20th place, well, at least you tried, here's a certificate. Like, you know, the whole class gets a certificate. And when for VBS, everybody has to be at least potty trained, and they can't be any older than 10. So it's vacation Bible school, and it's designed like Calvary Chapel isn't the only one that does VBS. I believe VBS is like any church can do it. They just have to buy the supplies and everything. And excuse me, and to have the kids that young, where they're younger than 10, they're coming in, and probably because their parents wanted them there. I think that's why most of them are there, because right, kids can't drive. They would rather be watching TV or playing a game. And last time I mentioned how my cousin went 1 year, and my dad said that, like, because at the end of the performances, they would do like an altar call, like, who wants Jesus? Who wants to have Jesus in their life? And I remember my dad told me that my cousin was kind of like looking around and seeing that kids, like more and more kids kept raising up their hand for Jesus. And so finally my cousin was like, okay, you know, I guess I want Jesus. And it's that might not be specific abuse, but I think it leads to abuse because it's indoctrination. It's getting kids, like I have no issue with nursery rhymes, but I'm just pointing out, like, at that young, you're understanding that Jesus is your everything. And I remember being that young. Yeah, I experienced my abuse, but also I remember asking in the church, like it's like one of my earliest memories. I was like, wait, but I thought Jesus already came back. And they're like, no, he's coming again. And I was like, wait, but you know, he came, he was born, and then he died and came again, and now he's coming a third time. And whether he is or isn't, the problem was that, like, they were like, wait, Caleb's too young to be asking these questions. Why is he asking this? This is making us uncomfortable. And so they just told me, like, no, Jesus is coming again, stop asking, and you know, just move on to something else. And when you have that type of environment where, again, the kids can't really ask questions, they're just, memorize this song, know that Jesus is everything, and that's great. But am I actually going to Jesus, or am I just, singing these songs because they're here? Like, they're kind of making us do it, and they're surrounding us with it. And as time goes on, I think that's why Calvary Chapel has kind of collapsed. It's not just the fact that when Chuck Smith died, all the branches of Calvary Chapel kind of like the tentacles kind of started retracting into each individual church, because they realized, wait, we all kept telling people that the way Chuck Smith sees things is how we need to see it. Like, each church has its autonomy, but it's limited up until Chuck Smith's um, preferences. You have to stop short of his preferences. And if I kept hearing throughout my childhood Pastor Chuck Smith or Raul Reese. He was like the biggest one, because when my mom got saved, he was there. So each time Raul Reese would come, my mom was like, "Oh, we need to go to church because Raul Reese is there. We need to get Raul Reese just came out with another book. He's my favorite. We need to get his book." And so it creates this idolatry that we're supposed to be proudly abstaining from, because we're not like the Catholic Church. We're not, like all these other pagan religions, or whatever we want to call them. Like, it's you can summarize it as hypocrisy, but I would rather go beyond it. And like, I think these people know what they're doing. It's just, I don't know if they're so like locked in into what they're doing, that they're like, I've committed 40 years of my life. I can't just stop now. Like, it's I think that that's what locks a lot of those people in mentally, is they think, well, I've been singing these songs since I was a kid. The church might be falling apart. Well, I still know some people, and when I see them here, I feel good. So I'm gonna keep coming. And whether or not that's like everybody's mentality there, that's like the feeling that I get when I go to those churches, or when I've been there, and I haven't in a couple years now. But it's it another example of the abuse is like a financial literacy course. And I'm trying to think of examples that aren't, your typical abuse. um if there is, a typical abuse. But what I mean is, so like, Calvary Chapel had this financial literacy course, and not only do you have to pay for it, but you're paying. It's kind of like Scientology. You're paying to advance. And the way you're advancing with this financial literacy course is you're giving all your financial information to the church, so now they know how much you should be tithing, if you're not tithing. But also, after each course, they were like, yeah, you're spending too much on this, you need to save money for tithing. And like, I know a family who, they sold their house, and it was like a big house. I had been to their house. They sold their house, moved into a trailer, because they were like, yeah, after the financial literacy course, we weren't being fiscally responsible, and we need to. They didn't say this, but I'm like, well, what else are you doing? Like, paying for your car or whatever? Like, you're or tithing? Like, everybody here is tithing, or else you probably get shunned, or maybe not excommunicated, but you'll eventually get some questions. And I'm like, hey, are you doing okay financially? We noticed you haven't tithed. And like,
Is
those,
tithing like
again,
donating to the church and like spending money? Is that what tithing is? Like the money that you're putting into the church? Yeah.
the 10%, yeah, the 10%. And they get that from the New Testament, when they were going around after Jesus died, and they were, or maybe it was, I, 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 I don't know. I'd have to look specifically. I can't remember if it was when Paul joined the church or prior, but yeah, they were supposed to collect 10% and use it for their ministry. And I understand that. I respect it, but it does take advantage of a lot of people, because like that financial literacy course example, like, they're paying to do this. Like, you're not giving them the supplies. I believe they all had to pay like 20, $30 to do it. And then and of course the church is like, well, you're paying for the supplies that we're giving you, so that's kind of, wait, we have to get the supplies too, so you need to pay something. But I would think that if like a church really did care, they would give you the supplies for free. They would, talk to you about this. They wouldn't pressure you into where you spend the money. They would leave that up to you, and yeah, trust that you have your own autonomy. But that's not what was happening at Calvary Chapel. And the only reason my parents probably didn't get wrapped up in that is, I mean, thank God my dad is a bit of a Scrooge, but I know that they have tithed this whole time, and they would tithe back then when we didn't even have a church. Like, we were meeting in a school, and I remember each Sunday they would put like a tally on, like, this is how much money we've raised, this is how much money we'd raised, and it kept going higher and higher and higher and higher. So if people weren't tithing, they would know, because like the week prior was only maybe like a couple hundred less, or if that makes sense. Like, it basically, the smaller incremental jumps instead of the bigger ones would show, like, you know, we understand people here in the church, might be financially strapped, but we can't do this without you. It goes back to that whole thing of, like, this is because of you guys. This is it creates it breeds toxicity, because now you're thinking, well, I do have my financial burdens, but I can't let my church go. They're counting on me, right? Like, they need me to do this. And it goes back into the whole control system. Like, I'm not against donating. I'm not against that. What I'm trying to, actively point out is the manipulation of that, using that to twist people's perception so that they think, oh, I do have to give all my money. I do have to fall short in other areas. And if I suffer, it's because I'm suffering for God.
And again, with sort of the hierarchies, if they're putting pressure on people who are financially able to contribute 10%, and is this 10% of their income? So they're working with people and sort of suggesting and requiring and putting pressure that members of this church, for your devotion, they need 10% of the family income or your personal income if you're single, right? And so if you're somebody who is financially strapped, and everybody around you is contributing, and they're saying that, if you're being told that by your church leaders, well, everybody else is doing this, to be a good upstanding citizen here, this is what you have to do, this is what everybody else is doing. Nobody wants to be the black sheep, and especially if like gossip is something that people are contributing to as well. You don't want to be in that gossip train of, like, you're the one not contributing your 10%. Then it sort of outcasts you, and it makes you, it's an abuse tactic. It makes you feel like you can't fit in, that you don't belong there. Instead of, this person's having a hard time and they can't, who cares? We have other people doing it and who can and want to, but putting pressure on people and making people feel like that's what you need to do to belong to this community. That's where the abuse, I think, starts to be a problem. It's not something optional necessarily. It's something that they're almost requiring for you to fit in and to grow. And if you can't do that, you get to stay where you're at. The people that are contributing get to continue to grow with us in the church, and they're sort of like the ones that move up in the hierarchy. You stay down here until you can do this. Would you agree that that's kind of how it's framed, to where people feel and aren't given opportunities if they're not taking these steps?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, not just everything you listed out, but my involvement started to get revoked because I wasn't doing what they wanted, and because I was asking too many questions. And, like, I had a church friend who, they worked in the school, so they, like, their mother, it was and still is a teacher there, and they had let me know, like, hey, I heard one of the church leaders gossiping about you, or saying, like, well, she basically said that the church leader was gossiping about me, and during like the school hours, and was like, oh, have you seen Caleb, what he's into? And that same person had told me, like, after their couple years working there, they didn't see God anywhere in that building. It was so purposeless, pretty much. And that woman who had spoken of me, like, I get people are going to gossip, whatever, but that woman who had spoken ill of me is like the financial accountant for the church. So she sees all the numbers that go through at least for the school. And I'm sure if she's doing all that, I'm sure she has access to the tithing and everything else for the school, because, or connected to the church, because she's the financial person. And if she's talking about me and either trying to sway somebody who's closer to me or whatever is her agenda. Maybe she just wants to feel superior, who knows? But if she's doing that, what else is she doing within the church and outside of the church, and trying to, like, because you only talk bad about someone if you're trying to present an image, if you're trying to like change somebody else's perception, or you're trying to feel superior, right? Like that's usually when you do that type of stuff. And I'm pretty sure her plus the pastor, plus whoever else may have been concerned, those are the ones that were like, even though my parents gave me permission to, or not permission, but their blessing, they gave me their blessing to work at the cannabis dispensary and do all that. And even though I was like the CBD kid and I was helping people with like rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, all those, I got my mom off some of her drugs and was getting her to use the tinctures. And so, like, people knew that I wasn't just a kid getting high all the time. Like they knew, like, I was doing the social media for them. It was great. I look back on it fondly, but the problems really did start to intensify there because they were like, Caleb's getting noticed in the community, not just like the church community, but like outside of it, he's getting, and if anything, I probably was getting more controversial in the church community because they're like, wait, doesn't that weed kid go to Calvary? Like they were probably, connecting dots and thinking like, but they're totally against that. And I kind of shared last time on how when my pastor did criticize me for that, I was like, I basically, my thought process, and I didn't go back and argue with him because I was like, whatever, this is done. I'm over it. But I remember thinking like, okay, if you're gonna criticize everybody and you're coming, or you're gonna at least criticize me for what I'm doing, but you're not speaking to the people who are, morbidly obese in our church, and it says in the Bible to not be gluttonous. Like you can. What I started to realize is like you can make an argument for everything, and these people, even though they say that they're looking at the whole church, they're not like Catholics, where Catholics just chant a bunch of stuff and then read things in Latin, and then you get like a couple verses in English. Like they're like, we're not like that. We're superior to that. But they're doing almost the same thing, just in their own Christianese, and they're getting you to, like, here's a good example. In Catholicism, you call it the Lord's Prayer, right? Like, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, your kingdom come, thy will be done. In Calvary Chapel, they call it the sinner's prayer. So they're changing it. They're keeping the same thing, but they're saying like, we're not like Catholics because we don't just memorize things for the heck of it. We're memorizing this, but also they're changing it. They're saying, because we all are sinners, so instead of it being the Lord's Prayer, it's a sinner's prayer because we're all sinners. And somebody could say, well, that's semantics. To me, looking back all those years, it's like, well, it's like it's like what in the Middle Ages, during the when the Black Plague was going around, and they would whip themselves. That's what it takes me back to. Is it's like church. A lot of church history is being a control system, and again, that hasn't ruined my belief. I still love our Creator. I know that this is all for a purpose, but like this stuff is going on, and I think now it's even worse because it's psychological. Like you might not be whipping yourself thinking that that's the suffering you need for Christ, but you're segregating yourself. You're saying those people aren't Christians, or those people are bad kind of Christians, when we all know, we've been told over and over again that Jesus was, he like covered for Mary Magdalene. She was a whore. Like he was hanging out with the tax collectors. Everybody thought the tax collectors were dirty, and like he was going to the fishermen and they were uneducated. He like went to all those people who were church rejects. And it all of that is what continuously just kept popping up in my mind, and I'm like, I can't deny any of this, because you can even look at the verse that says to pull out the plank in your own eye before you point out a speck in someone else's. And like, I again, you can pick and choose and make a Bible verse work for you. And not only did the devil do that with Jesus, he was like, well, then command these stones to turn to bread. And Jesus was like, well, I can live on, the word of God alone. And so Calvary Chapel is doing that and professing all along that, they have that right vision from Chuck Smith. They're non-denominational, yet they still have all these different book things that you need to buy, and it's you at least have a Bible. And if you at least have a Bible, you're not purely non-denominational, right? Because being non-denominational means you're not of a denomination. So if you're not a denomination, like, I consider myself, if anything now, I consider myself a true non-denominationalist, because I'm like, I can respect churches. I like when they're not a branch. If something's not a chain, I could probably go to that church. But unfortunately, now most churches are branches, because this beast system has just, like, encompassed everything. And it's not just in escaping polygamy. It's what you said, and what I've learned is these cults are out in the open. They're dressed like us. They're having modern clothing. They might even bleach their hair or whatever. And it's like, that might be outlawed in certain cult groups, but that's what makes the facade, the persona, the mask even all the more believable.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's really sad because churches are one of the first sanctuaries that people suffering go to for refuge. And that's what makes that mask all the more deceiving is, people, whenever they're traumatized, they're not running to a brand or like a company necessarily, even though cults do exist there. But religious institutions are somewhere people in pain go, are most vulnerable. And so to think that predators are sitting there at the door waiting for these people to walk in to take advantage of them, to buy their books and to join their ideologies and to follow the leader and to get sucked in, it's really scary, and for you coming from that and knowing what lies in there, that has to be really horrifying for you and other survivors who have had different types of abuse that has occurred, whether it's religious based or whether it happened through religion and through religious leaders in a religious establishment. That has to be really scary, trying to go somewhere and find refuge because you know how good it hides and how it shows up charismatically and how, like you said, it dresses like us, it looks like us, it agrees with us, it accepts us, it feels loving, it feels positive, and then it's almost like, you could easily walk in and get sucked into something again. So I can see how that would be really scary, but that should be all the more why people in these institutions that are active should want to hear testimonies like yours. Because if this exists at all, if even 1% of what you say is true, and I believe all of it, but even if 1% of what you say exists in this establishment that people are going to, they should want to take action and make sure that it's eradicated so they have a safe community that they can go to, that they can raise their children in, who can raise their children, and so on and so forth, and keep that generational pattern going without it being toxic, without it being forced with control and manipulation and coercion and paying money and buying books, and it should be a place of refuge and safety to where no matter what type of situation they're in, financially, emotionally, physically, they know that they can go there and be accepted and safe, not be gossiped about, not be peer pressured into buying the newest, coolest book, not be peer pressured into working only careers that they accept. And if you're working in cannabis, you're not allowed to progress in the pathways that they already had laid out for you, and that has to be really scary, and it's a miracle that you and others have even been able to still hold on to a faith of any kind after what you've gone through and how much trauma has been attached to something that should have been holy and pure for you.
Thanks. Yeah, I can't, like, this is only my story, right? My testimony, but I know that whether other people are in Calvary or not, like, people are experiencing this, and nobody wants to feel stupid. And I think that's why a lot of people, like, stay committed. Like, they they don't want to admit to themselves that they've been bamboozled. And it's not like, there's nothing wrong with you if an an evil environment has taken advantage of you. Like, I I'm trying to choose the words carefully, because, like, yes, an evil environment, or if you want to say, like a psychopath, or, might have taken advantage of someone. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. If anything, what a psychopath, and, my pastor very well could have been one. A lot of pastors are. It's the charismatic qualities, the control system that that gives them that psychopathy and or lets it flourish. It's being able to understand that like you were targeted because, or someone like me was targeted, or other people are being targeted because they are seeking solace. They want that peace. They know that there's already something they're unnerved by, so they need that extra guidance. They're seeking something out. And usually you only want to do that if you want to either feel better, improve yourself, whatever it is that's connected to it. You're at least seeking, you have that willingness I talked about earlier. You have a bit of that willingness, but when it gets hijacked by people who are psychopathic or just manipulative, whatever it is, at some point you have to take responsibility. And that's what I had to do after 30 years. Like, these last 3 years, if I would have stayed in the church, I would have been like, Caleb, you're an idiot. Like, how can you keep doing this? But for the first 30 years, like, I could have felt, I'll be honest, I did feel like I was stupid, but I would have actually been stupid if I would have stayed in the church, right? Like, it's okay to accept that you weren't in the best environment, but that I hope people understand that for them, especially if they're in a similar situation. Like, it's not that there's something wrong with them. They're being sought out because they have a willingness. Like, my mom is such a people pleaser, and I know that that's toxic in itself, but she's doing it because something within her feels like she needs to validate others, right? Or she may even get that validation from helping others, whatever it may be. And that is so wanted in a church, especially like Calvary Chapel. They can probably recognize people like that, and they know, wow, this person will bend over for us and will literally pretty much do anything we want. And it's not because my mother's a wicked woman, it's because there's something in her that needs that space to be filled. And unfortunately, she thought that Calvary was the place for it, when all we need is God, right? There's no mediator. We don't need, it's not necessary for us to go and confess. And that's what Jesus said, like, there shall be no mediator between man and God. It's like, if there is any mediator, it's the Holy Spirit. That's what it is. And that's right, that's God's connection to us. And if we reject that, that's on us. But if we accept it, that's also on us. And when as long as people, even if they're not Christian, even if they're not in Calvary Chapel, as long as people recognize that, I think that's also what helps the healing journey begin. Because again, some people don't want to feel stupid. Some people don't want to acknowledge that they've been duped, that they were bamboozled. And it's easier for them to stay in that system where every single time they go to church, everyone's like, hey, how's it going? Giving them that attention they may not get during the week. And that's what I think that's what the Bible talks about when you reject the Holy Spirit, when you decide. It might look a little different for everybody, but I think that specific instance that's a rejection of the Holy Spirit, because you're deciding, you know what, I'd rather play Christian than actually be a Christian.
I love everything you just said, and it reminds me of an article that I read. I don't even know when. I might have been like 10, 15 years ago. There was something I read that I never forgot, and it wasn't about being in church or a religion. It was talking about predators in general, and how if you're a woman, say walking through a parking lot, a predator who's looking for prey will more likely prey on a woman who has, might be looking down, might be on her phone, doesn't look like she's confident, isn't standing straight up, a vulnerability, versus a woman who maybe is looking all around, super alert, she's standing straight, she looks like she has her shit together and like isn't suffering that day or isn't struggling. They're more likely to pick on the person who looks vulnerable and who might look like they have a problem where they're not paying attention, or they just have some type of a chink in their armor that day looking at their phone. And so that's, I think, is like the essence of what you're saying. It's somebody that walks into the church who has a vulnerability. If they're not standing up straight, they come with a problem, they're being vulnerable, they're sharing, I'm going through trauma, or I'm suffering, or I just lost my job, or my other church I didn't like and I'm really sad, I want a new church, like I'm looking for somewhere to go, I want community, I want somewhere for my kids to grow up with other kids, whatever it is. if somebody walks in, and it's like such a beautiful thing that we have the ability to express vulnerabilities and that like we seek to fill them, like you said. And it's really sad and scary that there could be people that we're expressing them to who are that predator looking for the person that is showing that, saying, oh, that's an easy prey, versus an actual person who has compassion and care, who's like, oh my gosh, how do we protect you? How do we fill that cup for you? You know, like, let's create a safe space for your kids. You're suffering. We have a community here who can help heal you. Let's pray for you and bring you in and wrap our arms around you and keep you safe. You know, there's that difference. And that's what's scary, is they both look the same. Both the people, whether it's somebody genuinely who wants to fill that space in your life and who is there to help, looks very similar and sounds very similar to the predator who's coming in to swoop in like a vulture and take advantage of, oh, that person's going to be easy to target. They're struggling, they're suffering, they're not doing good. Like, they're going to do whatever we say. And that's exactly what we want, you know, and that's really sad. And it turns into like a whole trauma in itself, even if somebody can recognize, like, why would you want to even go to church after walking into 5 churches and everybody's trying to prey on you? You know, like, it shouldn't be that way. Like, we should want open arms to where anybody who comes in with any problem can go in and know that they're going to be safe, to know that that space is going to be taken care of, that that vulnerability is going to be respected and protected versus preyed on and made to be something that can be taken advantage of, you know. And that is a really important point for survivors, because I think a lot of survivors of these, whether it's like a direct physical or sexual violation, or just, gosh, I can't believe I was played like that. I just spent thousands of dollars on these books, and like, where did it get me? You know, somebody who kind of recognizes that they were in a psychological warfare, in a sense, with the control mechanisms from some of these cults. It can be really difficult, and there can be a lot of guilt. Like, I can't believe I just did that. Shame on me, you know, like that guilt and that shame of like, I should have known. Like, how did I not see that? How did I not see that I was prey to this predator? But that's exactly like what you're saying. And that's so empowering to like, no, that's the person's fault that preyed on you, the institution's fault that decided to take advantage of you. That's not your fault. And it's not your fault for not recognizing it, because it looks a lot like the genuine person. And that's by design, going back to what Oprah said. You know, abuse doesn't look like abuse like what we see in movies. Like, it doesn't look like the scary guy in the alley jumping out to kidnap you. It looks like the guy in the church robe coming out to greet you and saying, perfect, you have a home here with us. So sorry you're struggling. We're going to take care of that for you, you know. But it's like, is the person really going to take care of you, or are they really looking to take care of you and take advantage of you, you know? And that's like that is a really empowering thing to give back to people. That's not your shame or your guilt to carry. That's the shame and the guilt of whoever took advantage of you or whatever took advantage of you.
Yep. The body language, thanks for bringing that up, because I'm no body language expert, but I have used it a lot, just whether it was musical theater and understanding like, oh, okay, that's what that conveys, and like this emotion kind of pairs with that. And also modeling was great to refine body language, but everything you said about that, you know, like kind of like that defeated, when you have a defeatist attitude, it carries out in your body. And even if you don't have a defeatist attitude, but you're experiencing a moment, like my mom, when she had her miscarriage, that's kind of when she was at her lowest in Calvary. Like that's when a nurse was like, hey, you should come to Calvary Chapel. And then she saw Raw Reese, and it was, you know, wrong place, wrong time. And she got that. And I think what really perturbed a lot of people within the community when I came back from New York and everything was, they realized, like, I think a lot of them used to look at me like, oh, this is the little Fernandez kid. He's harmless. He's, you know, we can use him. And l- when I came back from New York, I definitely walked a little taller. But over the last 10 years, I didn't just walk taller. I believed in myself. I truly became confident. It wasn't just a cocky persona that I was putting on for the world. It actually became just me, like me just rocking myself. You know, thank God some of us can do that. And it took a lot of self reflection, everything to get there. But all people in the Calvary Chapel communities probably saw was, why does Caleb think he's the shit now? Like, why does Caleb think he's above us all now? And really, any environment that toxic is gonna breed the psychopathy. Like, I don't think you can get away with that, or I don't think you can get away from that, because that's what, if an environment like that breeds that superiority, like manufactures hierarchies, and someone like me who's neurodivergent and autistic, like, I don't care about hierarchies. Like, I'm gonna treat the waiter the same as my boss. Everybody's on equal playing field, right? Like, I hate and love everyone the same until they prove otherwise. And even I'm not gonna hate them. It's just I'm gonna realize, wow, that person's probably suffering from something. That's why. Or if that person, annoyed me, what's in me that is that they're reminding me of, right? Like, I try to do that instead of just immediately attack or criticize someone. But not everybody's like that. And the people who what I'm realizing is, when I left the church, it probably affected a lot of them understanding narcissism. Like, the worst thing you can do to a narcissist is disregard them. It's not like, it's not hit them or bully them. The worst thing you can do is just make them completely irrelevant. And I think that that's what I did. I was talking, I was trying to get the truth out there, and then eventually I was just like, you know what, I'm over it. Like, I said what I tried to say. I mean, I'm obviously doing this because this is a different channel, and this I believe that this is fruitful. But from the other experiences within the Calvary Chapel community, I was like, this isn't going anywhere. Like, I'm not gonna. You can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves, and it it's sad when people, and this isn't even just about Calvary Chapel, this can be for anybody who's experiencing this. When you start becoming, whether you want to call it your best self, or when you start actually believing in yourself and your actions show it, it's not just in your words. People who saw you not like that don't enjoy it. They don't enjoy your transition, because you probably made them feel superior by how I don't know, disappointed in life you were, right? Or like, whatever you were struggling with, that most likely made everybody who you thought were friends or who thought you loved you, or especially in a church like Calvary Chapel, that system, like, they're not going to enjoy seeing somebody think independently. They're not going to enjoy me walking in my own personal style, and everybody kind of in their boxed caricature of what a good Christian is, or what an American man is, or whatever it is, right? Like, nobody actually enjoys that. And if they do, I believe, like, not only do they have God in them, but they have a a self assuredness that you can't take away, right? Like, that goes back to us as as the child deciding with our free will that God gave us. Like, am I going to be resentful, or am I going to try to heal?
Absolutely. And again, amazing point. I think that that's very true. If somebody gets out of a controlled environment where everybody's sort of the same and being vulnerable, having all these issues, having to compete, these hierarchies that everybody's trying to like get these different spots in, the gossiping. If somebody gets out of that and all of a sudden they're not gossiping, they're not, having to succumb to not being able to financially pay the church. They're able to spend their money on whatever they want, and they're not in that sort of
Mhm.
control loop anymore. It triggers those people, not because even that they don't like that you're doing it. They don't like that they're not able to do that. They see a strength in you that they know is within them, but that they haven't had the courage to express. They want to be you, but there's something in them. They have the Stockholm syndrome. They're being controlled. They're being manipulated. Their whole family's there. There's so many elements and reasons and excuses why they won't leave that environment. And so it's easier for them to point the finger and ostracize you than to be like, gosh, I'm just upset because I can't do that. Like, he did something I can't do. And like, I'm reminded of that every time I see him, and it's triggering me because I'm not doing that. It like exposes somebody's own vulnerabilities, and they point at you and blame you for it, instead of being like, wait, I'm just mad because I'm not as brave as him. I don't have the courage to do what he did. I know something's not right here and I'm staying. He actually left, and he's doing what he wants. He doesn't care what people here think of him. He's rocking the dispensary. He's coloring his hair. He's finding his own self-expression, his own identity. And like, I'm fitting in, like it triggers people. And I think that that's amazing. And like, I love your self-expression. I could tell from some of the photos that like you probably had to sort of maintain a certain look and a certain haircut. Your family had to look a certain way. Like, you guys had to be representatives of the church, and so you have to express yourself a lot of times in the ways that the church wants to, or you feel pressure to look or be a certain way, like you said, wearing the mask. And like, I love now that you dye your hair, that you grew it out, and that you have your identity, that you're playing around with different ways to express yourself in ways that you likely never got a chance to as a child because you had to fit into this control group. And I think that's really important. I see that with a lot of survivors. Some of the first things that they do is like dye their hair, buy outfits that like they never would have worn, and rock different shoes and different brands, and just find like ways to stand out and like be you. And like, I love the way that you look now. I love that and I can tell like you feel at home. You're able to express and you don't care what people think of you. And it's beautiful, and I hope it triggers the hell out of people in that church that aren't doing it. And I hope that they're bothered by it, because you know what, that says way more about them than it does of you. And you did something that they don't have the courage to, and it's beautiful.
Thank you. I think of Joseph and his rainbow, his coat of many colors. They didn't say it was rainbow. It's not that it was, an LGBT pride thing. It was, when I think about it, though, I'm like, he obviously, like, it doesn't mention the tunic or the color of cloaks that often in the Bible. Like, he's one of the only mentions. Like, there are, like, I know there's another mention where when one of the women becomes bride, she gets like a nose ring, and sometimes it mentions those things. But I always remembered the coat of many colors, and his brothers obviously resented that his not only did the dad give him that, but he was expressing himself. Like, I can only imagine they all probably had like when people were mourning, they would wear like burlap, right? Like, it says that in the Bible. And so those people, his brothers probably had like neutral colors, right? Like a sand colored tunic, or something like that. So for them to see their brother in this like bedazzled coat, basically, like, of course they were going to get jealous. But there was something about Joseph that could express that was in his personal style. And that's where, like, personal style is what you bring to the outfit. It's not what the outfit puts on you, right? It comes from within. And confidence, I tell people, confidence wears an outfit better than anything. I've always said that, and I don't mean it as an insult. I've learned that when you tell certain people that, if they're insulted by it, it's because they have an insecurity inside they're not addressing. But what I try to tell people, that it's because they'll be like, "Oh, I could never wear what you're wearing," and I'm like, confidence wears an outfit better than anything. And then those types of people, it sticks in their head, and they're like, you know what? He's right. Like, next time I go to the mall and get something, I'm gonna, I need to own it. And that's when it comes through. But I like I love that this is it's still connected, of course, but it's a little lighter on this topic. But I like that we're discussing this, because yes, like, we need to express ourselves. And I could go into a whole tangent on how society's motivating and rewarding people to not express themselves. But especially in the church, like Calvary, or any controlled system and cult, they're not going to admire your freedom of expression. That is damaging. It's a liability. It shows that there's something in you that won't conform. And of course, that doesn't mean every person with bleached hair is, the best Christian, or whatever. It's such a that's just you can find somebody who's dressed and looks like me who's absolutely repulsive, right? But really, again, what it's coming down to is in here. It's a vibe, your riz, whatever. But it's it's something that we can't teach. We can't, and you can do everything you can to pull it out of someone. But I think for people like us, you're going to you're going to push them away if you're trying to pull that out, because this is something that's in me. Like, when I first started bleaching my hair, I had done hair modeling, so I had it bleached, and even my eyebrows, just my eyebrows with the brunette on top. And I had done photo shoots like that, but to actually do this a couple years back when I started, like one of my cousins, I came to a family gathering, and like my mom was still a little thrown off by it. A lot of my cousins and Tias and Tios, they were like why would you do that? Why'd you do that? And one of my cousins, she's I know she's at least ADHD because she's been prescribed and like legitimate, like legitimate behavioral health work. But she was the only one. She has her own style too, and she was like, "This has been Caleb since I can remember. Like now he's just finally expressing it." And I didn't completely understand what she said at the time, but after reflecting on that, I'm like, you know what? She's like she saw me as a baby. She saw the I want to say brilliance, not in the way of like, oh, I'm super intelligent, but like if a diamond has brilliance, or the luster on it, like there's something, and that even might be why I have epilepsy. There's a lot of fireworks going off in my brain, but this brilliance that I have has always been with me. It was just stifled for a lot of years. And I had to decide at that point, am I going to continue stifling myself? Am I going to just not, I don't want to say fight, but it kind of is. You have to fight to survive. And if you don't have the grit and the determination, because you will get scared. It's not even about being fearless. I don't even want to include that, because I think it would be like cope to say, oh, you got to be fearless. No, like we all have insecure moments, and we do feel anxiousness in when, I mean, again, it's we're social creatures, so you are going to feel anxiousness if you are leaving a controlled system, if you are deciding to not go that direction. It's the grit and the determination that keeps you in that. And I wish I could just like hand grit to people, but they you need to have that. Like you even have that pumping out videos every day. Like how many people start a channel and then just stop, right? It's this goes beyond just Calvary Chapel. This is like within, feed that, let it, if you let that dwindle, you are going to feel empty. You're letting a piece of yourself die, and it's not. And I think that might be what tricks Christians in cults like Calvary Chapel. They're like Jesus said, I gotta crucify the flesh. I gotta let my old self die. And I agree with that, right? We become renewed. It's a renewing of our mind. But if there's a piece of you that will shine. And it even says in the Bible, don't put your light, or what is it? Don't put your lampstand under a basket. It's just something like that. Like that's literally in the Bible. Like you are not supposed to cover what is meant to shine.
They're conforming and they're miserable because of it. And so they take it out on people like you who have the courage to break out of that, and it's really sad that there's not more people that can sort of do that for themselves. But I think it really does take like that self-reflecting, like you said, that asking questions like, who is Caleb outside of this environment? And that's a hard question to ask when all you've ever known is the Caleb that's been in that environment. That's not easy for anybody. But I love that you were able to ask the question,
Mhm.
and that as scary as it was to make so many changes to your life and to get away, you embraced it, and it was something that ended up being a beautiful thing for you. For now, you're not stifled anymore. Like you've blossomed. Like this is Caleb that we get to see today. And like I really love that, and I love that you're not afraid of that person to let them come out, versus how many years you had to sort of compartmentalize yourself to fit the image of others and what they wanted you to be. And, I love seeing that with so many survivors that come out. There's a girl that I interviewed a couple times. Her name's Teresa Stell, and she came from a sort of similar type cult environment as you, not the same church. Hers was Seventh-day Adventist, but it was the same like
Mm.
environment, and her family was like so strict. She actually did live sort of like on a reserve. Her little family was like in the middle of nowhere. And anyway, she wasn't allowed to wear like princess dresses and like dress up growing up. She had like a very neutral dress code, and she does dress designs now, and she's been in Vogue magazine. Like the things from her not growing up,
Wow.
either like seeing a dress to like now she broke out and like let that part of herself create the things that she designs dresses that she
Mm-hmm.
wishes she could have worn as a child, like the dresses that like she dreams about. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
she's made a whole career of it and like been in Vogue magazine, and she's had catwalks and she's had fashion shows with her stuff. And it's like, that's just beautiful. Like that's really what it's all about. You know, however we want to express, whether that's if we're wearing it, like you said, or if it's something that we're creating, like that's such a central
Mm-hmm.
part of healing, is like pulling that pain out and like transforming it into whatever you've been suppressing, whether that's, you know, physically or something that you can create. And it's just really wonderful. And I think that's like such a good example of, you know, sort of like healing that inner child, being able to still play as an adult and like bring those parts of ourselves
Yeah.
out and express them, and not just like always have to conform to fit whatever image it is, whether it's at work or at church or wherever it is, you know, to be able to play and to self-express. And I really love that you and others are like reteaching that to us, that creativity, and to like embrace that that's not something that we should ever suppress, and that it doesn't feel good, and it like turns us into miserable people. Like we have to be who we're not if
Mm-hmm.
we're just like keeping that bottled up.
Yeah. Oh, that gave me tingles. Like I felt it, especially it went up, it started in my arm and went up like all the way to right here, and just like I know that that's God, not just the the spirit, moving through me, giving me the tingles, but also just working in her life. Like for her, like that's why our creator made creation to be creative, right? Like it's just it's all connected. Like I see that, and I see how her trauma, obviously, her she's not letting it boil and fester, she's channeling it. And so many people, like, probably to even say that, "Oh, you're channeling your energy," like that would probably be like, witchcraft, like wickedness. But I'm like, that's the best thing anybody can do, right? Like you channeled your curiosity into making these, not just this channel, but your two prior ones that got shut down. Like you channeled that. Like if a lot of us actually learn channeling, I think that that's what is alchemical. Like that's it's not turning lead to gold, but we don't need to turn lead to gold. We just need to turn what trauma. So many of us have unresolved trauma, and if instead of dwelling on it, reflect on it enough to heal yourself, to understand what occurred, to not blame yourself, but don't dwell on it. Once you've done that reflection, and reflection is, like a continuous process, but once you've really really reflected and figured out what you were missing, now's the time to channel it. Because I even made, I don't know if you want to say the mistake, but I tried just speaking outright things, whether when I used to have an Instagram, like trying to put it on that, or when I did use Facebook, putting it on there, like. But all people are gonna see is just, here's somebody having a mental breakdown, or here's somebody having, a moment, like, or here's a Jesus freak trying to convert us, or here's, all the different ways that it can be perceived. And the reason why it kind of came out like like a Mean Girls word vomit, like the reason why it was word vomit was because I hadn't fully processed everything. I was realizing things, but I hadn't fully realized. Like I hadn't, what's the term, like self actualization. I hadn't completed the process. I was still going through it. And if people can formulate and channel it correctly, then, or maybe not correctly, but efficiently, and if people can channel that appropriately, so it's not convoluted, it's clear, it's, you understand, there's no hidden agenda, there's no hidden motive, it's just what you desire and what you have been able to put forth. And that might sound a bit hippy dippy, but I believe that that's really what all of us are capable of. It's just some people don't like hearing that little voice, so they keep the TV on. Some people would rather look at a podcaster than start their own, and not that it's right or wrong to do that, but what is wrong, or what's unfair, I think, to yourself, is to not channel that God-given, energy, that spirit that makes us not just human, but I think close, like not just even closer to God, but that's what makes us not an animal.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such a big healing point when a victim can figure out what to do with their pain, how they can transmute it instead of letting it continue to victimize them. What can they turn that into? And that doesn't mean that it solves all your problems. It doesn't mean that your healing's all done. But if you can put your pain onto a canvas and you're creating art for people, if you can write a book that people can go home and read and all of a sudden it changes their life and they learn something or they can relate to it, if you can go on podcasts and share and and the right person hears it and it heals something inside of them, if you can create clothing, whatever it is, social media, I mean, it's so endless, but when you can figure out what that is for you, what can I do with this inside of me? How can I transmute it into something that is going to help myself and others? That's when like real healing begins. And even if it's not something that like you share with others, just to like get it out of your body and to turn it into something that's not pain, that's not suffering, and to do something like productive with it that like you feel that makes you feel good instead of traumatized. That's such a big part in a healing journey. I feel like that's like one of the triggers of like going from victim to survivor is like figuring out how to do that. And everybody has their own unique way that they do it. But I think that's like when real healing can occur, when you can like put a purpose to your pain. And it might not be something that like right away, like how that's going to transmute throughout time, but just like even like you said, like self-expression, like dyeing your hair, like that's a huge step when you've been in a high control cult group your whole life. Even just to do that is like, oh my gosh, I just did that for myself, and like nobody can say anything about it. I don't care if they do. Like that in itself is like an act of courage and bravery, and then to like continue to figure out those little things and big things that you can do. You're doing podcasts now. You're speaking publicly about something that was like a secret for so long and something that like you had to keep compartmentalized. Like that's huge. And I think that that's like such a big part of healing is for all of us, whether you're an extreme abuse survivor, a cult survivor, whether you've just had, hardships growing up or suffering from the loss of somebody or a breakup, we have to figure out how to like transmute that. And like you said, channel, like how do we take something and spin it into something else that like makes us feel good instead of like shit.
Do you know the comedian Monique? She came out in Precious.
Monique, that sounds familiar. I think I do. Yeah.
She got some recent backlash because when she did that film, she didn't because Oprah and I forget the other director were basically like made the film happen, and her whole thing was, I abided by my contractual agreement, and anything after that, the extra things that they wanted me to do, which most celebrities would bend over and do in Hollywood, she was like, I'm not going to do that. So like they only paid her 50 grand for the film when it made like, millions, like hundreds of millions. And she wasn't going to like the press stuff. Like she wasn't going to the interviews. She told them, no, like you didn't pay me to do that and it's not in my contract. So no, like you've already used me enough. And so the industry of course flipped that as like she's being, way too ambitious. She thinks she's, the shit now. She's everything that they could have put out in a smear campaign. And that's like she has two things, that plus she was abused. I believe she was sexually abused as well. If people are familiar with her story, and her husband at one point told her, she let this out in a different interview where she was like, my husband had to help me realize I can't keep blaming everything on my abusers and who did whatever wrong to me. I can't keep doing that. Like, yes, that happened. Yes, it's not my fault. But if I keep using that as an excuse as to why I can't do something else, or why I'm not good enough for something, then I'm now like the active abuser. I'm limiting myself. And whether you want to say like, tough titty or just grow up, like that's what she realized. And some people aren't, some people don't want to hear it that bluntly. Some people, it's probably wiser to not say it that bluntly. But she went from abuse to being in a basically a cult, right? Like Hollywood's a cult, but she didn't completely succumb to it. She rose above it, and I didn't even think about this, but she was expressing herself the whole time. And whether you're in like a cult like Hollywood or Calvary Chapel or in a different controlled system, it's you realizing, and I've said this plenty, right? Like you realizing everything that happened, reflecting on that, but now deciding whether it's adulting or just taking accountability and responsibility, like what am I going to do about this? Like I've seen memes where it's like, okay, you're woke, so now what? Like, right? Like you know how the world works, how corrupt it is, so now what? Like are you going to go out and fix it all? Are you going to, are you going to keep ranting about how terrible the world is, or what are you going to do? And like that's something that like I can give advice for people, but I can't, like you can't just copy my path just like I can't copy your path. Like you have to now decide, am I going to channel this into something that sheds a light on it, or am I going to pull in even more, it's and if you do pull in even more, it's going to manifest. Like I've told people I get seizures when I'm way too stressed out. Like over being over lower my seizure tolerance. That's what my body does. What do you think your body does? Do you think your body manifests stress and overstress as gaining weight? Because that happens to some people. Do you think that it could be developing cancer? Because we've kind of figured out cancer, but we also, scientists even now, like I learned this at the University of Arizona, like we know that cancer is caused by mutations, but your body's supposed to kill a mutation before it, flowers. So that's the paradox, right? Like it's like, okay, so we know that. So what is causing it then? Right? We still don't have, like, you might have some cancers that are more, they've connected to certain things, but I firmly believe that people probably are creating cancer in themselves because they're just overstressed. And if it's because they're eating and then that produces the cancer, okay, then that's maybe the direct correlation, the direct connection. But what are you maybe not ignoring, but what are you dealing with that you're also not addressing? Because your body will manifest that. It's just it's gonna happen, right? Like you cannot avoid that. And a lot of people don't think about that. And I think the only reason that I think that way is because it's not because I'm any better than anybody else. And I mean, it might be because I have a relationship with God, but I think it's how God has basically helped me with my self-awareness even as a teenager, like getting told you probably won't be able to drive because of your seizures. We wouldn't recommend that you get your license right now. You need to stabilize things. And so early on I accepted, okay, I'm not going to drive. And because of that, I had to figure out other ways to get around, whether it was people helping me or me going to New York so I could get myself around, or going to Tucson, which is like a huge biking city. Like I had to then realize, what am I going to do so that this doesn't stop me? And not everybody has epilepsy. Some people have maybe something worse, or or even their mental health is so it's so debilitating that it's now like manifesting it like into their hands, and their hands are getting wretched because they're constantly balling them up, or they're constantly grinding their teeth because they're so stressed. And that doesn't come from nowhere. It's there, and your body keeps the score. It will not go away unless you make it go away, and or help keep it in check. So for like me, I'm gonna have epilepsy the rest of my life. Like me and my doctors have discussed that. I'm like, it's okay. Like if that's what I have to deal with, and then okay, I've accepted that. But I won't let it stop me. I won't let it control me either, because I used to commit to things, especially if, like in the church too. I would commit because I thought I had to. I know it was a bad word for me, and that is even, I mean, I could go on a completely different tangent, but that's even part of the self healing journey too. Is no actually bad? And it's like, no, like if you like that's what's called a boundary. And like during the last podcast, you actually brought up, you're like, there was a lack of boundaries, it sounds like, and I was like, yeah. And that is, if you're in an environment that breeds that, like Calvary Chapel, it that I had no reason to say no, even if I didn't want to. Like I had come up with every other reason why I should say yes, because it's the godly thing. I should present, a reliable image as a Christian because everybody's watching me, and whatever else. And at some point, you just, at least what I did, I was like, just F this, kind of like Jesus in the temple. I was like, no, like I'm gonna flip tables over and make people notice. And it wasn't because, I needed the attention. It was like, I don't think Jesus needed the attention in that temple. He did it because he knew what was right. And I'll admit, like at one point, I got that validation from Instagram. Like I would be lying if I said otherwise. But I got to the point also where I was like, if people don't like what I'm saying, oh, the quote of, I don't know if you've heard this quote where, if it's for art, then it's not, or if it's art, then it's not for everyone. And if it's for everyone, then it's not art.
Mm.
And I mean, this channel is an example of that. This channel is not for everybody, but that's because it's artful. Like, if it was just like, I don't want to judge, but if it was, I guess I'm going to put a label. Like if it was a Mr. Beast channel, what to expect. It's just, a bunch of hoopla and, games and prizes and all that. And that's why it's kind of marketed towards everybody, because it's not artful. There's no depth to it. They're not going to be asking deep questions on a Mr. Beast challenge. They want the views, right? They want the views and they want the hype. But that also applies to what we're doing. Is my words, my character, my new self was triggering people, but it was because it had depth to it. I never thought about this, but yeah, I'm like living an artful life. I am a creative. Like that I've accepted, but like thinking about, I am living an artful life. And when even, I may have mentioned this on the last podcast, but like when I did all this, it's because I felt stripped of my creativity, and working in the news industry and thinking like, this is such a creative job, but there's no creativity in it. If that makes sense. It was even starting to be misleading, because even if yellow journalism has been categorized and kind of something that journalists should not do, like yellow journalism was then trying to get attention from headlines and sensationalizing everything. And even if people are supposed to have like stepped away from that, what do we do on social media all the time? We're sensationalizing everything, whether it's like, the best photo of you at the beach, even though the rest of your summer was boring. Now you're making, your life look eventful with that one photo. That's a stumbling block for them, because you have to, I want to say you have to have a self-awareness, but like I think you're pretty self-aware, and I know I'm self-aware, but like that's not something people can buy at a store. And um, you might be able to help coach someone to increase their awareness, but it's something they have to be willing to notice, like the things that used to make them uncomfortable. If you're going to succumb to that uncomfortableness, you're never going to progress. Like I felt very uncomfortable enrolling in a Jewish studies course, and looking back on it, I'm like, why was I ever so uncomfortable? The only reason why I was uncomfortable was because I knew in my heart that it could challenge my perception of Calvary Chapel. Like it could challenge everything. And but that's the whole reason I did it, because I was like, I need to look up what con- what triggers me in a way. Like I need to. And I didn't just look up, I enrolled in the academic course at Penn State in two of them, and I knew I need to push past this uncomfortableness, because if I don't, I'll be living in denial. And that was when I was like 19 in 20, was it like 2012, 2013? That was around that time. And that was years ago. And that's why like nobody is ever going to wake up and decide like oh, I want to leave a cult. Like, even if that's kind of what they show on TV, like, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I'm sure that's true. It's like their their process of not being able to take it anymore probably started 10 years ago, like mine did, right? Like, you go through all this stuff and you might not have to preach it to the world, kind of like you mentioned, like you might be able to keep that in yourself. But um, and I don't think that that's wrong to kind of keep it in yourself. Sometimes you need to do that for the safety. Like watching some of those women on escaping polygamy, like they can't voice that they want to leave because then they get like on lockdown and people control their system even more so. So I totally understand. Like sometimes you do have to do this journeying secretly, but nobody should ever feel ashamed. Nobody should ever feel like they're hiding something because of that. Yes, they might be keeping information from other people, but in that evolution of someone, they shouldn't think of it as they're hiding. They're just being strategic. They now know that not everybody who they thought was their friend or lover or church mate, like those people aren't always trustworthy. They might present that trustworthy mask, but you don't know who they're going to say it to. And you can go in a really bad direction with that type of mentality because then you can have like your walls up for everybody. You're not trusting anybody now. Everybody is at an arm's length. And that is going to isolate you, unfortunately. So you you have to have that willingness to be like, okay, this person I don't know. I want to get to know. And yes, they could wrong me, but so could everybody in this entire world. So am I going to hold like am I going to hold everybody to an impossible standard of never offending me, you know, never doing me wrong, never all of those things? It's like if you do that, then you're kind of in denial also because you're looking for the perfect person and there's no person that's perfect, right? The perfect person or the perfect anything would just be God, our creator, because he's the one who made us. So if you're kind of going in that direction, that unhealthy direction, you're just making yourself even more miserable. And I don't want people heading there because they think that they are doing the best thing. You know, they've heard Caleb or they've seen other stories from other people and they're like, well, at some point you just have to pack up and get out. And if that means leaving your whole life behind, that means leaving your whole life behind. And yes, but that doesn't also mean keeping everyone from or keeping new people from possibly being involved in your life because that's going to create like an extremely lonely life. And I know that all we need is God, but God wouldn't have made all of us if he didn't think we need each other, right? Like to me that's just kind of logical.
One other thing I wanted to ask of your wisdom, a lot of parents, obviously, we want to keep children safe and prevent this journey that you've gone on from happening to more people. If we could stop it at its root and get parents aware of the dangers, we'd have a lot less to worry about even at these churches because parents could be aware of, how to spot wolves in sheep's clothing or just even what to do to keep their kids safe if they can't prevent the wolves from being in their environment. But what advice would you give to parents, especially at Calvary, knowing your experiences? The cool thing about your experience, and it's not cool, but the good thing about your advice, I should say, is the things that you can offer for advice for people at Calvary, it really does cross over and it can be universal no matter what religious institution you are in. These things can happen anywhere at any religion, any religious institution, any church, and there's
Mm-hmm.
crossover. And so from your experience at Calvary, for parents that are going there and then the crossover to other parents that are taking children to other churches and religious institutions, what advice would you give them to keep their children safe or things to look out for, things to do? How can we be proactive as parents if we aren't one willing to leave the church, if that's not something that they're ready to do or want to do, and knowing that there's a possibility of these wolves in sheep's clothing potentially being there without us being able to detect them?
Well, what an example that just popped up in my mind was how like so for those parents if they're a parent they're obviously old enough to have some understanding of how the world works, but I think what they need to accept is the reason why things seem so crazy in the US is because they are. Like, like the US was made of a bunch of rebels who left their country because of persecution, but they were being persecuted because they weren't following the religion the way Britain wanted them to. And they may have taken over indigenous colonies and whatever, but besides that, it's like they're rebels. They're rebels to their core. And they think their religion is right and everybody else's is wrong. So like we've had a very long history of that. And I think a lot of people forget that. They'll call them Quakers, Shakers, whatever. And those were all in a way like cults, right? They were like little cults forming and they had their own colony. Like, there's the Pennsylvania Dutch, they have that. And this has been going on for a very long time, even prior to that. But like the reason why America is so unique is because we had that setup, and I think a lot of people take that for granted. They think that that's 200 years ago, whatever. We've moved past that, but no, a lot of states still have those mentalities, even if there are other religions in the area, or new immigration has brought other mentalities. Like those core ideals are still there. Like Texas is like that because of all the people who founded Texas, right, and helped make it, and they all had those religious ideologies or ideologies. And we have in America, right, the separation of church and state. We have that on our in our founding documents. But when I look at a lot of Calvary Chapel, from my personal experiences, they would bring in like so many political speakers. They would tell you how to vote during election time. And not only is that not a separation of church and state, but it's a great example of how the indoctrination even seeps into people's political opinions, and it's almost in a way forced on them. And when you're telling people how to vote and you're telling people that, like, a parent is probably going to listen to their church if they're that invested in it, but what they need to realize is, like, if they're doing that in this one little facet, it's not just that one little political sphere. They're doing it all around the board, and they're doing it in ways you may not realize. So encouraging people to go to vacation Bible school. I went to a church in Yuma, Arizona when I was working for the news there, and they didn't have vacation Bible school. They told us, they're like, we would rather you just take a week off with your kids and have vacation. Like, and I remember thinking, even though that sounds great, and I actually think that that would be, good for a family. I remember at the time I was like, but that's not how Calvary Chapel does it. Why would you do it like that? Like that was still so engraved in me that I just hearing an alternative to vacation Bible school for the kids. And I think now that I've accepted, I'm like, that's actually not that bad of an alternative. They want people to spend quality time with their kids, and they would rather them do that than host a little quickie vacation Bible school for all these kids. So if you're going into a church and you find those alternatives, and they may not be what you grew up with, that doesn't mean they're wrong. That means it's an alternative, because we have tons of options. We have tons of alternatives that we can have. That's just life. And when you're so glued to how something else needs to be, that should be a warning sign of, what have I been brainwashed with? Like, why am I just so stuck on this being like that?
I love that. And I think that that's universal. I think no matter where parents are taking their children for uh, religion or for community, all of this applies. And that's why these testimonies are so important, because even though it's your own unique experience, the wisdom from healing from it and taking a step back and looking, so many things that you learned can be applied to so many other aspects of life, and so many aspects of so many different people's lives who have completely different testimonies than you. And so I really appreciate you, Caleb, sharing all of this. I feel like I could talk to you for like 10 more hours, because this is just like, it's
Right.
such a deep topic and it's so unique, your experience. But like I said, it's like also so universal. So many of these things are literally all around us all the time that you have gone through, you know, these cults and these leaders, and even just like manipulative people and people who are looking to feast on vulnerable people. Like, that's the world that we live in, you know, and because we're not taught it, we don't see it all around us. And the more that we learn, even though it's scary and even though it's really hard to like accept that this is the world that we live in and that these things are happening, it's also really empowering to like get to know about it, because then like you can walk with that confidence of being yourself, because you know that you can't be preyed on anymore when you know what the dangers are, when you know what the enemy is and how they work and where they hide. All of a sudden they can't hide and they can't mask, and it's something that you can be proud of knowing, and like you can navigate the world so much better, not getting sucked in to things that could be looking to prey on you. And so your experiences are just so valuable. And like, I love watching you light up, talk about this stuff. I love watching you be able to impart wisdom, as well as you can articulate the trauma that you went through. You can also articulate what you've learned from healing. And it's just really wonderful. You know, I would imagine myself, like if I went through even half of what you did, like I can't even imagine the battle of getting there and feeling confident and like being able to throw the shame away, and, you know, to get to a point where you can like go on a podcast and like talk and articulate this stuff without just completely breaking down. And, you know, I'm sure it was just such a struggle for you, and I'm sure it still is some days, you know, but just what an amazing miracle you are to be able to be here today, smiling and confident and self-expressing without worry, and, you know, to be able to share all this with us. And there's so many more things that we could talk about. So I hope when the time's right, we can do another one and talk about some more of these topics. Because I mean, there's no end to cults and being able to break down all these different things about them. But because we're coming up on time, I wanted to ask, is there anything that we didn't get to cover today that you wanted to spend a little time on? Anything that you wanted to say before we start closing up?
Yeah, I appreciate you just providing a safe space for this. And I still don't fully realize, and I didn't even realize with the last video, like the amount of support that would come this way. And that's not why I'm doing this, but it feels so good and it's so comforting, and I appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you, and
You're so
thank everyone.
This is the support you should have always had. And it's such an amazing year that we are where we're at in time, where this is like a socially acceptable thing to even talk about now, that people are like believing and wanting to learn, and like knowing is out there, and wanting to support those who have been victimized of it. And you're beyond deserving of everybody's support and love. And, you know, it's something that you should have always had. You should have always had that army behind you. And I'm really grateful that you're out here rebuilding it, you know, building the right army with the right people who see you and want to hear you and support you. Do you want to share how people can get in touch with you or follow you if they want to keep up with your journey?
Yeah, I haven't written a book that I want to sell. You know, it's just, if you want to support me or, you know, creep on me, just at Caleb John Fernandez. That's my YouTube and TikTok. TikTok is what I've been more active on. I've been trying to play with that more recently. So yeah, if anybody wants to find me, those are the best ones. And I would appreciate whether it's the subscribe on YouTube or the follow on TikTok. I appreciate it.
Yes, and I would encourage you guys to please support Caleb. It's such an easy thing to do, to follow on social media. We're all here anyways on it. If you guys are watching on YouTube on Caleb's videos, we are collaborating. It's an awesome new feature that YouTube rolled out. So you guys can actually go on my channel on this video, look down below right where the video screen is, where you'd normally see a subscribe button for my channel. You can also hit that and it'll bring up Caleb's channel, and you guys can go subscribe from this video or the last one that you guys tuned into or are going to watch before or after this one, which I'll have that episode in the show notes also. But please go subscribe to Caleb, whether it's on TikTok or here on YouTube. It's just an easy, free thing that you guys can do. And so many of you want to help and are willing to help and asking how you can help. That's an easy thing that you guys can do, is just go support where they're at online, and it doesn't cost you anything, and you're probably already on those platforms anyways. So reach out to Caleb in the DMs too if you guys are a survivor yourself of Calvary or have a similar experience, or if you just want to connect with him, offer him encouragement, or send him any tips if you are a member there, have experiences. I'd love for, people who have gone through similar things as well to form these small communities. That way you guys aren't isolated anymore and you guys can find your new communities. And Caleb is obviously out here embracing that himself and, open to all of you and your encouragement and support of him. So please go offer that. And I'll have all my information in the show notes as well. Connect with me, and I'll have my email down there as well if you guys want to be on a guest on the show, if you're a survivor as well, ready to speak out. And of course, if there's anybody listening who is unsure about wanting to come forward as a survivor of Calvary, or if you've been hesitating to reach out, if you want to reach out on my email, I can forward that to Caleb and you guys can connect. And I would love, actually, I was telling him before we started recording, it would be really cool to get like another person or a couple people to do an episode on Calvary and get people together. So if there's anybody out there hesitating or wanting to make the jump, this is your invitation to come forward and to help be a voice for this, and we can get people together and speak out about this as a group. So I encourage you guys to do that if you're in a safe space too. And we can't do this without you guys. You guys are the backbone of this channel, of this movement. And I love all of you guys so much. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Caleb, for coming on. We will see you guys next time, and take care.